play is the work of childhood. Toys are the words. You can learn more about a person in an hour of play than in a year of conversation. I'm just taking care of my brain. I'm just staying emotionally balanced.
The power of play with gifted adults. Hi, friends. It's Diane here at Someone Gets Me, and I have my good friend Janette Berne with me. She is a play therapist, and you can see all the toys behind her and things, and her office is full of really yummy things to help people learn how to play and express themselves. Now, we all know that those of us who are gifted, we like to express ourselves in interesting ways, but sometimes it's hard to play and kind of let loose a little bit. So I asked Janette to be on the show to help us understand a little bit more about the value of play, how you can get involved in playing more, and whatever else we come up with. So go get your tea or your coffee and get ready for a really good conversation with a really powerful play therapist. Janette and I are both on the board of the psychology department at the University of Florida, and that's how I got to know her. So I hear her really fascinating ideas and her comments about things of how to lead young people to a really great future. So you will really want to listen to what she has to say. So Janette, thank you so much for coming on Someone Gets Me and taking time out of your busy life to be here with us today.
Thank you, Diane. It's a pleasure.
This is going to be so fun. I have so many things that I want to ask you about. But I kind of would like a little bit of, for all of us, like a little bit of a backstory of how did you get involved in wanting to help other people in a mental health psychology kind of way? And then if you could segue into what excited you about play therapy and how did all this kind of come about? Because I think it's fascinating.
Well, my undergrad degree is actually in business. I was not one of those that went into college knowing what I wanted to do. And so at the advice of one of my parents who said, we've got 4 years and then the money's out. So you got to get this done. I got a business degree and it was useful. I worked in outside sales for about 4 years. Now, I had always done volunteer work, and I was working with children whose mothers were fleeing abusive situations. I was volunteering. So it was a shelter for people that were fleeing abuse and neglect. And I couldn't wait to get done with my work day so I could go volunteer. That was like, it really energized me. And there was nothing light about it.
Right.
And I met social workers and counselors and, got to know all these fascinating people. And I thought, you know what, I want, and through my own therapeutic experience, I thought, this is amazing. I want to do this. So I went back to school, got my degree, and I live in Atlanta, went to Georgia State University, which at the time was very much a night school, a commuter school. And I was very lucky in that program really spoke to me. And I chose it over social work, which was traditionally, now right now, the practice I work in, there's tons of social workers. I love social workers. It's nothing, but that was pitched to me as a safer way to go, but it just didn't speak to me. So when I got my master's degree in counseling with focus on child and family, everything I read, it didn't even feel like going to school. It just, everything I read, it was almost like I knew it intuitively. And a lot of people thought I was crazy in my family, but I haven't looked back. I've been in this field for 35 years. I've completely enjoyed it. I mean, it's challenging. It can be grueling sometimes. But that's how I got into the field in general. And I did do adult mental health for a little bit. My program where I studied had a very strong play therapy program. And I really enjoyed, we all know about some of the main founders in the field of psychology. We know about Freud. We know about Carl Jung. And hopefully we all know about Adler. Well, the program that I was in was heavy duty Adlerian. And also, a lot of Carl Rogers and the child-centered play therapy, which is mostly what I practice. That is an offshoot of Adlerian. Well, I shouldn't say an offshoot. They're all kind of in the same family of psychotherapy. It's all the humanistic,
Right.
The more humanistic model.
And so you got drawn to the play therapy.
Yes.
And then what did you have to do? Did you have to do any extra training or extra internships or whatever in order to be certified in play therapy? Or did it come with the degree? How did that work?
You have to work after licensure for 3 years under supervision. I did that, and it was while I was doing that I switched. I was at a mental health center working with adults, and then I went and worked in private practice with some psychologists and switched to doing groups with kids. I had sort of gone back and forth, and now I see all different ages. But for a long time, it was mostly children, teens, and families. So it was sort of a licensure thing. It's like, well, this job came open, and I was doing groups with kids, and it was a lot of social skills. We went over social skills, but we had to present it in a lot of different ways. Worked with a lot of neurodivergent kids. And I didn't realize I was doing play therapy. But I was. I was doing the more prescriptive, the more top down, the more directive play therapy, because when you have a group of 5 or 6 children in a room, they tend to need a bit more direction than when you're working with one. So they were a lot of fun, here again, challenging. And what I started to love about working with kids is that from the therapist viewpoint, they're going through so many developmental changes that you see a lot of growth. You see it, you can see it more rapidly than with adults. So I was always going to play therapy seminars, and becoming a registered play therapist it's really a relatively new, it's not even a license yet. So that was another 150 hours. And at the time, I think I had to do it in like 3 or 4 years. So I traveled to some, in the Southeast, I traveled to some universities that would have these week-long play therapy intensives to get on my hours. I had to go back for supervision from a registered play therapist supervisor. But, like I said before, it's sort of like, doesn't really feel like work a lot of days.
That's what I tell all my gifted and my neurodivergent people, is that if it doesn't feel like work and it's so natural to you,
Right.
that's your calling. And sometimes we're like, it's not hard, it's not a struggle, so that's not my calling. I'm like, this is the opposite. When it feels so natural and there's a sense of ease to it, and it might not be easy, but there's an ease, then I think that's what our calling is. And that's what you're describing. I'm listening to you and I have goosebumps, like how the flow is so beautiful. And I think that you being open-minded and checking things out, and like when you were talking about working at the shelter as a volunteer, it's like those moments of innocence where we're helping out. Our ego can't deflect anything because you're just volunteering. All this great information and connection showed up that could then help drive your path in a way that's so deep and meaningful. And I love that. I love that story. I think it's really cool. So I have a couple questions about neurodivergence because, of course, I work with neurodivergent people, and a lot of neurodivergent people listen to this podcast. And play therapy in my world, and I'm sure yours too, is vital to our mental health, our physical health, and our overall well-being. And too many people, we can get too serious and bogged down with all the stuff, all the drama and distractions. So what are a few tips that you would give the person listening to us that's going, I don't know about this play thing. Like, I don't have enough time to play, or I'm too busy, or they have those excuses. And you could tell that if they could just give themselves a little bit of permission, they would get relief from that quiet pain. What are some tips you would tell that person to do outside of calling you or calling me? But like, what could they do even if they were like a little nervous?
Well, if I could back up a little bit, and maybe we can reframe it, because I'll hear this from parents sometimes that, play therapy. They don't play therapy. I mean, it can be a hard sell. And I think in our culture right now, in this moment, the word play has been trivialized. And we don't realize, we're not educated about how much development and how necessary play is for brain balance. So play is the work of childhood. Toys are the words, play's their way to communicate. Toys are the words. And I don't think we ever give up on, we ever lose the need for that. Mm-hmm. If you think about what is fun about play, there's something novel. If you see a child playing, they're just completely focused on what they're doing. It can be in the dirt, it could be with rocks, the simpler the better. And it does a lot for our brains to balance it out, to help make connections where other things just aren't going to do it. And I think a lot of adults do play, but we call it hobbies, right? It's called something else. I think a lot of ways so if I'm hearing you correctly, how do we kind of loosen up, give ourselves permission to play?
Right.
Well, maybe there's a hobby that you were interested in. Maybe there's something that kind of piques your interest. Maybe, I always thought Tai Chi might be kind of cool. So if you tend to be intellectual, great. Let's go with the resistance. Study something, and I'll use the Tai Chi example. Well, it improves balance. If you need intellectual permission,
right.
Go ahead, study different hobbies and find out how it'll benefit you. Some simple ways, you see it all around, like the adult coloring books.
Yes.
Getting a sketch pad, allow yourself to doodle. If you have to, pull the shades down in your house, turn on music, and you don't have to go bananas, but just let yourself snap your fingers, and you'll just feel yourself loosen up. So I think for adults, really through art and music, if you're near nature, one of the things that children love to do is go on a nature walk, collecting, whatever. Here's this type of leaf or that type of shell. If you're ever at the beach, oh my gosh, you could do it. If you feel like you need to be sort of secretive about it, just sit by the It's kind of where the waves come up and just make a little sand castle. It'll bring you back.
Do it on the side.
Right.
You just reminded me of this story when I was running this. I was a clinical director of a substance abuse treatment center for mostly CEOs. So most of them were gifted. And we were on the beach on Treasure Island in Florida. And I used to come up with all these wild ideas to get them to come out of themselves, and try not to overthink anything. And you just reminded me of this one thing we did. I took the group, there were 8 of them, to the beach. And I divided them in groups of 2. And their job was to build a sandcastle collectively together, but they could not use any words to communicate the building of the sandcastle. And so they got to learn lots of fun things. And I have a picture somewhere of all of them in their sandcastle because it awakened that part of them that liked to dig in the earth and create something. And they had the challenge of not getting to speak. So that was interesting. But once they got beyond that and they could communicate in other ways, all of them loosened up. And it was just making a sandcastle on the beach.
Right.
So you just reminded me of that story because they all thought, even the owner of the company that I was the director of for him, he goes, you're crazy. I said, well, play is so important because we learn better when we're playing. Our neuroplasticity works better when we're playing. Life is better when we're playing, at least on some level. That doesn't mean we're childish and go play all the time, but we have to learn how to loosen up a little bit. So you just reminded me of that story.
Right. That's great. And also, most of communication is nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was doing groups, we would have challenges like that. Like there was the newspaper challenge where they would have a stack of newspaper and masking tape, and they had to create something that would hold a heavy book together, but they could not talk.
Mm-hmm.
It really helps you tune into the other person in a way, in a nonverbal way.
Yeah, I think that's very important, is all that nonverbal, because that's the majority of our conversation, like you said. So I want to talk about another piece of this. I want to understand how play, and I want everyone to understand how play interacts with the idea and the feeling of personal safety.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to be a little bit more lighthearted and maybe more fluid through situations. And your experience at the shelter probably has some resonance with that, because so many times gifted people and neurodivergent people don't necessarily feel safe in the world because the world's not built for us. And so we have to learn a different way to navigate it. So speak to that a little bit. Is there something that people could do to learn how to lighten up a little bit and be a little bit more pliable through a world that we know is not set up for neurodivergence, but yet if we use play a little bit, it could help us feel more safe?
Right. Well, I am all for earbuds if you need them. I mean, a great many of the people that I work with are neurodivergent. So, maybe they don't want to have headphones, but if you have certain sensory sensitivities, you can wear the discreet little earbuds as you're going around in the world. So lower it, control what you can, know yourself, to thine own self be true. Mm-hmm. So do you have sound sensitivity? Do you have light sensitivity? There's ways to get around it to make the world so it's not quite as harsh. Do you need to have, my goodness, I've got a whole basket of fidgets. Do you need to have a fidget while you're on the train going to work? Why not?
Right. I have a doodling pad for whenever I'm on hold.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Especially when I was a clinical director and I had to be on hold a long time for insurance companies. But now, even when I'm on hold at all, I just have my phone on speakerphone and I have a doodling pad and I have all these cool little color pencils. They're pens that are all these different colors. And so I make little things, and I'm not an artist by a long stretch of the imagination, but just letting myself do something creative while I'm waiting makes it less frustrating.
Absolutely.
And so that's a form of play therapy, right?
Oh, absolutely.
See, sometimes I just call it me being goofy, but now I can say, see, I'm using the skills.
You are. You are. Doodling is it's a wonderful way to relax. If you I'll just give you an idea, Diane.
Mhm.
If you get like a little saucer,
Mhm.
maybe about that big around,
Right.
and make a circle in it. And what you do is you take a dark pen or a black marker and you fill it in without going over the line. You sort of make loops,
Mhm.
make several of those, and have them with you, have your colored markers, and then you can color those in. And there's something about it being in a circle, you get the power of a mandala.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that can help keep you calmer while you're waiting on hold because it is unbelievable when it's like, push one for this, push two for that, push 11 to hear the menu again. It gets a little ridiculous.
Right. Or there's no choice that's the viable one because I'm gifted and I think through every single stupid thing instead of wondering, well, it says this, this, and this. Well, this is related, but it's not that. So do I wait through the whole menu or I don't know? And maybe I won't call back. And our brains just start. So I like the whole idea of coloring like that. I'm going to try that next time. I'm
I
going to do
thought
that.
I was the only one who did that
Oh
when I
no,
was old.
me and all my people do. We laugh about it sometimes. It's like, no, that's how it is. And even sometimes like when we're at the board meetings and everything, that's why I always am sitting there either doodling something or moving my hand, stimming somehow or something, because I have to have some kind of input in order to focus.
Right.
And I don't like to look rude or disrespectful. And I also know that if I don't give myself some form of input in order to focus, I won't be able to focus. And that to me is even more rude because then I won't be following what anybody's doing wherever I am, you
That's
know?
right.
Yeah.
Well, when we were kids, they had silly putty.
Yes.
And my brother, who is neurodivergent, he was the king of silly putty. He had that in his pocket. He would have it confiscated continuously. And I think that was like the first fidget. He just was ahead of his time. But yeah, they make fidget keychains. So what I try to do with my clients is let's find out what sensitivities you have, how to make the world feel safer, and do it in the most discreet way possible. Um, some people are comfortable wearing the big headphones. Great, go for it. Sometimes I work with middle schoolers and they're like, no way. It's like, okay, how about some little earbuds?
Right. Yeah, it all depends. Like I see people with headphones. I have friends of mine that use big headphones and those don't feel comfortable on my head as much as earbuds will. And sometimes the headphones are fine. I have a set of both just in case. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
That's really fun. So in your office there, you have lots of different, you were showing me around a little bit before we started recording, and you have all these different little stations.
Yeah.
So if I was going to come see you, say I'm an adult gifted person, and it's a session with you, do you guide what the person goes toward? How does a session look? Because I think it's kind of curious because a lot of people think therapy is just talk therapy and there's so much more. And and I would like people to have just a little introduction. Like if I was new, after you got to know me a little bit, right? How would it look? Because you have all kinds of cool stations. Like I'm all over that the sand figure things, because I'm a beach person. And so I would love that. But the stuffed animals behind you that I see, especially when with the big red mouth right there, I love that one. And so I'm sitting there going, well, I want to play with that too. So how does it work?
You'll have to, come on down. Well, I do connected. I've got the typical therapist office with the sofa and chairs and end tables. Um, and people do go back and forth between the two. Um, most adults do stick to doing regular talk therapy. When we really bring in play is when I work with families. and I do an intervention with adults. I try to do this with most of the adults that I see if they're open to it.
Mhm.
And it involves the little figures for sand tray. So, sand tray is one of the oldest forms of play therapy. It's a lot of people think play therapy is a new thing, but it's been around since the 30s.
Mhm.
Some people say the 20s, but close to 100 years. And sand tray is one of the first uh, forms of play therapy to ever be created. Now, how it was created, I'm doing air quotes because it was created by people observing, interested people observing children and how they play. So children will naturally play in the dirt. They will naturally play in the sand. And given shells or organic materials, um, they'll play with that. They'll do all kinds of imaginative play.
Mhm.
So then therapists started bringing other objects that children are familiar with. So at the time, it might have been dolls, or they used to do, back in the early 1900s, a lot of children's toys were made of metal. They had like little tin soldiers. Um, so they could bring that and they would enact scenes in the sand. Then there was a therapist who started, she called it, I believe it was Margaret Lowenfeld, and she coined the term make your world, the world technique. And that's what I say to people is, you can use it, and I have several hundred miniatures. It can be kind of addictive. I hit every yard. I cannot pass a yard sale. It's very hard for me.
Well, see, I've
Uh,
gifted people. We have collections of all kinds of things, and so you're just telling on yourself.
Great. That's great. Wonderful. Collect them home. But something that I do with adults is I'll say, pick a figure that represents who you are now, and then one that's more aspirational, one that represents who you'd like to be, how you want to be seen in the future.
Mhm.
And clients really like that, um, because you can only get so much out of talking. And when you're doing something concrete, it just adds another dimension and it adds more meaning to it. And as a therapist, it gives me a metaphor. I can say things like, oh, so, let's say I've got all kinds of soldiers and I've got little knights. So let's say they pick one and it has a suit of armor on. And then they say, I wish I could trust more. And in the future, I'd like to be more open and feel safer. So they may pick a more typical one. Well, as a therapist, it enriches the work that I'm able to do because now I have a metaphor about the suit of armor.
Yes.
And how thick is it? Does it really need to be that thick?
Mhm.
Can we open it up a little bit? Do you need it all over you? Seems like when you took that risk, you took off some of your armor. So, that's just one idea. Now, with art, and this is another technique that's been used for I'm thinking at least 80 years, which is the kinetic family drawing, draw your
Yes.
family doing something. But what I do, I have paper, it's like the newsprint on a roll.
Mhm.
Now this is a lot of fun to cover your walls in it.
Mhm.
And this is stuff I would let my kids do. Um, have, when they were growing up, cover the walls with paper, and then you can get some big movement going on with markers. But drawing a picture of your family doing something, or really just draw a picture, because we're dealing with the subconscious at that point.
Right. I often have people draw pictures with their non-dominant hand.
Oh, wow. How does that work?
And it comes out really amazing because it's like the non-dominant hand takes the ego out of the way, so they can't like control, because most people aren't ambidextrous, and they have even more power in it. And like you were saying, words don't do it any of our experience justice, because they're like more like pointers, right? And the English language is inferior language when it comes to expressing emotion. So I always tell people, don't rely on English. If you're multilingual, use another language to translate it, and then point to it in English if we need to, and come above language. What's the experience, the color, the feeling, the depth? And non-dominant hand, when I have them draw or write with their non-dominant hand, always something amazing comes out that they don't even expect.
Wow.
And sometimes I'll have them write with their dominant hand a question, like, what should I do next, or something, whatever it is. And they write it with their dominant hand, and they say it out loud. And then right at the end of the sentence, they flip the hand to their non-dominant and answer it right away without thinking. And so the other than conscious answers the question for them. And it shows them often that they do have the resources.
Right.
And it's a matter of allowing themselves to connect to the resources and trust those resources. So that there's so many different fun things, and it works best when there's markers or crayons involved, like the thicker ones, so it's not adult hands necessarily that's holding it. It's the kid hands in that way. Yeah, that's really fun. So I know that being a therapist takes a lot of energy and a lot of work, even though it's fun and you love it. So what does Janette do to take care of herself? How do you practice your own level of self-care? And what's your favorite thing to do for fun?
Oh, wow. Do I have to pick one favorite?
No, you can give as many ones as you want.
Great. I have a couple of little rescue doggies at home. One she's just like a wild little terrier, and she's hilarious. So and we also have a bird. So plants, birds, my house is covered in it. I recently learned how to play mahjong, which is fun. That's a lot of fun. And it's a whole different way of thinking. I love to garden. I love anything on the water, which is tough in Atlanta. That's tough. Walking, exercise. I have more of a Netflix habit than I'd like to, and I want to admit. Reading novels. I try to read very light. I'm not in any book clubs or anything, because I just read. I like to read lighter,
Yes.
lighter novels.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's so cool. I love it. So is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we ask the final questions of the show that you think is interesting or exciting, or that you would like to share about the power of play for gifted people?
Well, I think it's the power of play for everybody, but the quote that I always like to start off with is, and Plato said this, you can learn more about a person in an hour of play than in a year of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And think about the times that's been true. Like if you've had a group building activity at work, and it's like, whoa, I didn't know she was like that.
Yes. Oh, yes. I just had a bunch of different little vignettes run through my mind over my life. That's hysterical.
Right.
Yeah, that's great.
I just hope that people stop trivializing play and saying, oh, I'm just messing around. I'm just playing. You could say, I'm just taking care of my brain. I'm just staying emotionally balanced. So that would be a big wish for me.
I think that's true too. When people tell me they're just anything, I go, just means second class. And why don't you say I'm doing something that's beneficial for myself? Because it does increase neuroplasticity in our brain, which we would like to have, I think. So there's so much more value And I like your point about not trivializing it, because I think that happens in the world, which is why I asked you to be on the show, because I know how important it is. And when I met you, I'm like, I loved your energy. I'm like, oh my God, you'll be wonderful. And it's an important topic to give all of us permission to say, play is not being a childish kind of thing. It's not acting out. It's actually useful for our development and our overall health, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It's required if we're going to have a balanced life, period.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I have a couple questions. Oh, and by the way, everybody, if you're really loving everything Janette's saying, like I am, as you can tell, check the show notes for how to contact her, how to follow her, and make sure you let her know you heard her on the show, because it's really important. We never know who it is going to be that's life is going to be changed for the better because of this conversation. So give us some feedback and let her know that you heard her here on Someone Gets Me. So what is the most memorable food that you have ever eaten?
Probably when, I'm thinking local foods while I'm traveling. Something that you get off this, from a street cart that you think you know what it is, and like, okay, this is a little sketchy, but everybody seems to love this.
They all love it and they're all eating it. So, okay,
Right.
it might look a little funny, but I'll give it a try. Oh,
Yeah.
yes, totally. I can relate to that one. I do that on purpose as well. And so the last question I think is a really important one, and it has to do with your own mission and your own heart. So if we were going to create a billboard that the entire world was going to see with a quote from Janette Berne, your original quote, what would it be that you would like the world to see and understand from your heart to their heart?
I would say play every day.
I love that. Play every day. Oh, that's perfect. Oh my gosh. So I want to thank you for being on the show with me here at Someone Gets Me, and thank you for being in my life. I'm so glad I know you. I'm so glad I'm going to get to see you more as time unfolds, and I really appreciate your time today. So thank you.
I've loved it.
So remember, everybody, put your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you, because you're a rock star. You're here on purpose with a mighty purpose. So go out there and, just like Janette said, play every day. Until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, this is Diane and Janette saying, be well.